everyone, Professor Davis here, and we are now going to go into the part 2 of diseases of the digestive system. In this particular video, we're going to focus in on the viral infections as well as the parasitic and even the helminths or worm infections that are part of the digestive system. All right, so starting first with the viral infections, these include mumps, which is also known as parotitis. This is going to cause inflammation of the salivary glands, which are in the throat area. This is known to be caused by the paramoxovirus. We also have the different types of hepatitis viruses. There's A, B, and C. There's actually a few more, but those are the most common. Hepatitis means inflammation of the liver. So far you're seeing two that are more for those accessory organs that we talked about with the digestive system. And then last is the gastroenteritis, which is caused by rotavirus. So the first one here is mumps. Mumps is an RNA virus. It is transmitted in saliva, and it's going to be shed through respiratory secretions. It does replicate in the host respiratory tract, but then it travels in the bloodstream specifically to the salivary glands up in the cheeks and throat. We see symptoms include swelling of the parotid glands, which again are those salivary glands. We see fever, and also it can have some major complications. Specifically in males, we see that it can cause orchitis, which is going to be inflammation of the testes. And this can actually cause complications for fertility in the future. We see prevention is going to be the MMR vaccine. It is what we call it's an attenuated virus, which means that it's been very much weakened and it's not going to actually cause you to develop mumps. Now, when we look at this, we do see that this was more common before the vaccine was developed. You can see in the picture here. And it's one of the main things when you see in cartoons and stuff where somebody's got the wrap around their head. A lot of times there were ice packs here to try to decrease the swelling that was taking place in those glands. All right, and so this is just part of that. It's not a very common disease anymore because of the vaccine. If we take away the vaccine, we would see a rise of mumps probably develop. The next one is hepatitis A. Hepatitis A is also known as the infectious type of hepatitis. It is an RNA virus, but it does lack an outer envelope. So it doesn't have that special structure of that outer envelope around it. We do see transmission from person to person, and it's through the fecal-oral route. Or again, eating something that is contaminated, like mollusks specifically. And this is mollusks that have been living in contaminated water for an extended period of time, like snails, the different types of oysters, clams, that kind of stuff. It could be passed on that way as well. The virus does shed in the feces. It can also shed through blood and urine as well. Symptoms include vomiting and nausea, and it does create a dark urine, and it can cause you to be jaundiced because of the damage to the liver. Liver, when it gets damaged, it does deposit those pigments of heme in the skin instead of getting rid of them like it's supposed to, and that's where the jaundice or yellow color comes in. In this particular case, it is self-limiting in the sense that there's no chronic form of hepatitis A. We do see that we are going to use prophylaxis if exposed, and this is going to be known as gamma globulin. And there is an immunization that can be helpful with prevention of hepatitis A. We then have hepatitis B. Hepatitis B is known as the serum hepatitis. This one is a DNA virus, which is enveloped. So we see that it's a different type of nucleic acid in the fact of it being DNA, and it does have an envelope, which makes it different than hepatitis A. Transmission of hepatitis B is going to be through direct person-to-person contact, but this contact is either going to have to be through blood or semen. And so in most cases, this one is also considered a sexually transmitted infection or disease because of that. We also see, though, it could be transmitted from mother to infant. If the mother is hepatitis B positive, it could potentially transfer to the unborn baby. Healthcare personnel are at higher risk in this, and then the fact that they're going to be treating individuals that have hepatitis B. And when we look here, nobody has to disclose what they have. Like when they come into the ER, they don't have to tell you they are hepatitis B positive. They don't have to tell you they're HIV positive. They don't have to tell you that stuff. So you need to use precautions like everyone has it. We see symptoms are similar to hepatitis A, but they're more severe. The liver failure or cirrhosis is going to happen in a lot of the cases. And we see complications is it can become chronic, where it hangs around and it's not going to be kind of self-limiting like we saw with hepatitis A. We also see that it causes a risk of hepatocarcinoma, which is liver cancer, cancer of the liver. Screening is through a blood test. It'll be an HBs antigen test that they're looking for specifically. And prevention is an immunization. This vaccine was genetically engineered, and it came into play really in the 1990s. The next one we want to look at is the hepatitis C. Hepatitis C is an RNA virus, and it also has an outer envelope. Transmission is going to be from direct contact of blood and semen. This one is also a big deal because it was being transferred through transfusions before we knew what it was. People would donate blood who were infected with hepatitis C, and it would go to the next patient, and it wasn't something we tested for because we didn't know that it was there. We didn't know it was a problem. It actually was known as a silent epidemic for a long time because we would see individuals who would end up having all these complications and their liver would start shutting down, and we didn't know why. We didn't know about it. And it was actually a bigger problem than like AIDS and HIV was there for a while. We do see that 85% of cases progress to chronic hepatitis, so chronic inflammation of the liver. Treatment is interferon plus ribavirin over months period of time. But this treatment is very costly, and it does have some really bad side effects that can come into place. Prevention is to minimize exposure. There's no vaccine for hepatitis C, but we want to minimize exposure. So we can do that now because we know what we're looking for, so they can test the blood products before they're given to people. We also see that tattoos were a big problem with this, and it wasn't the needles. Tattoo artists were really good about switching out the needles, but they didn't want to waste ink, and so previously they would use the little small cups for ink, and as they went back and forth with tattooing, when they had ink left over, they would put it back in their big stock of ink. Well, this is a problem because as you're going back and forth, blood is being transmitted back and forth as well. It's in small quantities, but if it's got hepatitis C, that's how a lot of those infections were passed on before we knew. Now, when they use that ink, if they have any left over in the smaller containers, they have to dump it. It cannot go back into their large stock again. Okay, and so this again helps us minimize that exposure. The next one is the rotavirus. Rotavirus causes gastroenteritis or inflammation of the stomach and intestines. We see that it is the major cause of gastroenteritis. It's the main cause. Transmission is normally due to the fecal-oral route. We see this is in a lot higher frequency in children, and it does cause severe diarrhea and dehydration. Diagnostic test for this is immunoassays, so they're looking at the immune system, taking the blood and then looking for certain kind of markers that are present. And treatment is antiviral therapies, but they're generally inadequate. They have to kind of just let it run its course. And so fluid, of course, reuptake is super important here to help prevent the severe dehydration that takes place. All right, now we're going to switch gears. We're moving out of viruses, and we're going to look at ova and parasites. Now, ova are the eggs of the parasites. And first, we want to look at stool collection first. All right, so when we take a stool sample, we need to collect it in a certain way in order to perform the examination for the eggs, the ova, and the parasites. So let's talk about this real quick. So we need to make sure that the stool sample is free of urine. We see that it's barium-free along with other medications such as antacids and laxatives cannot be present. We should not refrigerate the samples, okay? So it can't be where they've been refrigerated. Liquid stools need to be examined ASAP, as soon as possible. And the reason for this is it allows them to look for motility of these parasites and eggs. See if they have the ability to move. That can help distinguish what type of parasite you might be looking at. These are normally ordered in threes, so you're going to be giving samples 3 separate times in order to look at the tests. 1 specimen per day, every other day is best. So like say if it was Monday your first specimen was given, you would then wait and give another one on Wednesday and then on Friday. But there would be 3 in a row, skipping a day in between. There are collection kits that can be used and they are available for this, but they have to be the ones that some of them have preservatives in it because they can't get it to them right away and you can't refrigerate them. All right, and so there are collection kits that are available. So once the stool sample is collected and we get it to the proper area to examine in the lab, what are they going to do? Well, first, they're going to do a direct examination. They're going to use the microscope on this low scanning and the high power. And they are going to do what we call saline mounts and iodine mounts. Now, saline mounts are going to allow them to look for motility, like movement. And then the iodine mounts are going to stain cellular structures so we can get a closer look at what structures we're dealing with. A lot of times they will also use what we call the trichochrome stain. This is for them to move up to the oil objective on the microscope. Now, another thing they want to look at is the concentration on solid stools, and they're going to look for things like cysts or eggs, and they'll do this using iodine as well. So let's talk about the protozoans first, okay? So when we look at the protozoans, we have 3 different types of infections that we're going to look at here. We have giardiasis, which is caused by Giardia lamblia. We have cryptosporosis. This one's caused by Cryptosporidium. And then we have amoebiasis, which is caused by Entamoeba histolytica. Now, one thing to note about protozoas, if you'll notice here, they do have a life cycle that is typically a fecal-oral life cycle. And so we see that the cyst is normally going to be passed in the feces. It's normally resistant to the dehydration and different things there, and it goes into what we would consider the ecosystem. It's the infective form, and then if you take that in through the actual consuming contamination of food or water or whatever, it then is going to change into what we call a trophocyte. At the trophocyte stage, that's when it works on feeding, motility, and reproduction so that it ultimately produces more cysts and it can continue the process. So let's look at giardiasis first. This is a flagellated protozoa. You can see that it has the little tails or flagella that are present. We see that we ingest the cyst form in contaminated food and water. They mature into the trophocytes, which then invade the intestinal lining. Now, symptoms include foul-smelling diarrhea here, abdominal pain, and individuals who are at higher risk of this kind of infection are going to be hikers, backpackers, and campers, because streams often contaminate the cysts that are deposited from wild animals. And so if you're drinking out of those streams, even though it looks like clean water, you may be consuming some of those cysts unintentionally. Treatment is going to be flagyl, okay, for the most part, and we might see that they may use a type of antibiotic mixture with it, metronidazole. We also see prevention is water purification. So if you can purify your water, you can boil it, you can put iodine in it. You may want to use one of those filtered straws when you're hiking or camping. Those will be more helpful in preventing unintentional infection. The next one is the cryptosporidiasis. This one is going to be from a sporozoa protozoan. So these guys don't move on their own. They're going to be transmitted and moved by other organisms. These are going to be transmitted via contaminated water. It does invade the intestinal epithelium and it causes mild gastroenteritis. It'll cause some abdominal pain and watery diarrhea. Now, symptoms are very severe if this type of infection takes place in AIDS patients. AIDS patients, because they don't have the immune response to help protect against these guys, you're going to see a lot more severe symptoms and complications occur. The main type of prevention for this is going to be water purification. So amoebiasis is the next one, and this protozoum is caused by an amoebic dysentery. It's an infection cyst from ingested contaminated water or food. We see that it will mature into the trophocytes and then invade the intestinal lining specifically. Now, it does enter the bloodstream and it can move to distant organs like the liver and lungs as well, but normally it stays within the digestive system, but it could spread. Infected individuals can pass the cysts in their stool. And treatment, again, is similar to what we saw before with the flagyl and the metronidazole. We also see water purification is the best way to help with this type of infection as well. So let's look real quick at the 2 different forms. And so in this particular case, you have the trophocyte form and then you have the cyst form. Now, one thing to remember about amoebas are going to move a lot of times by that pseudopod, that false foot that helps them push and pull forward. Okay, so each of these had a different type of motility. We had flagella, we had pseudopods, and then we had non-motile in these examples. The next group we want to look at are the helminths, the ones that are the worms. And so there are two main groups of worms that can cause infection. Remember, there are the flatworms. The flatworms are known as the platymenthes group. This is going to be tapeworms. It's also going to hydatid disease and also flukes, specifically the liver flukes here in this example, because flukes normally get named based on where they like to reside and grow. We then have the nematodes. This is from the phylum Nematoda. This group is going to include pinworms, hookworms, Ascaris, trichonellosis, and Strongyloides, sterculalis, Trichura, which are the whipworms. So let's talk about the tapeworms first. These guys are going to be where there are two separate types that can cause issues in humans, and it is where they come from. So we have a beef tapeworm and we have a pork tapeworm. Taenia saginata is the one that comes from beef, and then we have Taenia solima, which comes from pork. Now, one thing to note about tapeworms is they have some distinct structures. They have what we call the scolex, which is their head. This head region is going to attach to the intestinal lining because it has two features that allow it to do this. It has hooks and it has suckers, and we're going to see a close-up look at its head in just a minute. The other main structure that's part of these flatworms are what we call proglottids. Proglottids are their body segments, and there's going to be hundreds of these. Each one of these body segments can break off and be free and released through the feces, and they can grow into a whole nother tapeworm. So what's really crazy about these guys is when we go to remove them, we have to make sure we remove every piece. Otherwise, a tapeworm will grow back. Now, an issue with these guys is because even though they're flatworms, they can also get very, very long. And when they get really long, they can cause intestinal blockage and severe abdominal pain. So let's take a little closer look at their structure. So in this particular picture, you can see that they have the proglottids, which are those little structures of the body. And then you have the sclerex, which is the head. And you can see here the kind of hooks and the suction cups that are present. Now, this, of course, is specifically the beef type of tapeworm. Now, for the pork tapeworm, we do see that they have the similar structures. But another thing is these guys can be in the bladder, where we call them cistercilli, and these guys can be called bladder worms. They also can be encased in sacs. Their tapeworm larvae can be encased in sacs, and they can travel to other areas besides just the bladder. And in this case, you can see a sac of them inside of the brain. So they don't always just stay in the intestines. So the next one we want to talk about are the hydatid diseases. These are due to small tapeworms. So they're still tapeworms, but they're very small. They don't get really long like the other ones do. Echinococcus granulosus are the main culprits for this type of disease. We see that you get infected by contact with animal feces. Specifically, in this case, canines or dogs are one of the most common. These cysts are going to be where the worms form in the tissues. And cyst damaged organs can be the liver or the lungs. So this one is showing you the hydatid cysts in the liver, and fluid is in the cysts, and it has potential to, when they do rupture or explode, to cause the patient to go into anaphylactic shock because the immune system is going to try to take care of them quickly, which then ultimately is a hypersensitivity or an exaggeration that can occur. The next group are the flukes. The flukes are flatworms, but they're not tapeworms, okay? And so they're going to be flat, but they're going to be larger, like more robust in that sense. These guys are going to be the liver flukes specifically. Flukes a lot of times get named based on where they like to grow and develop. So they could be the liver, the bladder, the lungs, things like that. But we're focusing here mostly on the liver flukes. And there are two different types that can cause issues. With this, we have Fasciola hepatica, which are sheep liver flukes, and Clonorchis sinensis, which is the Chinese liver fluke. The intermediary host in this particular case is snails. Now, when we look at these guys, they have a very elaborate life cycle, like it's big. And so there are different hosts that are part of that life cycle, and snails are kind of one of their in-between hosts. And you get them ingested with water plants like watercress. We also see the larvae can migrate to the liver and develop into adults there in your liver. And the results are going to cause liver damage and jaundice to take place. The next type of worms we're going to be looking more at are going to be our roundworms. These are going to be part of the nematoda or the nematodes. In this particular case, we're going to be looking at pinworms. We see that they are going to be where you ingest the pinworm eggs or you can inhale or swallow them. The eggs then hatch into the intestines and they start to mature. The adult females will lay their eggs a lot of times near the anus, and this is really common in young children, and it actually causes them to have like an itchy anus area. And so the more they scratch an itch, the more that it can be passed on, because then you're passing it on through that idea of releasing those worms. And so washing your hands is really important. And with little kids, especially as we're trying to potty train kids, this can be an infection that is pretty common. The next one are the hookworms. There are two different types of hookworms that are here, but both of them are going to be where the larva will penetrate the skin, and they typically penetrate through the feet. These types of hookworms are Necatar americanus and Ankylostoma duodenal. So when we look at these groups, they are going to migrate from the foot a lot of times into the bloodstream, ultimately entering into the lungs and the digestive system. We see that they have hooks that hold fast the intestinal lining, which you can see here in its mouth. You can see these hooks that are present, and it leads to anemia, fatigue, and weakness. The next one we're going to take a look at is the Ascaris. The Ascaris is going to be a nematode, which is also a roundworm. These guys are going to be where you ingest the eggs of these roundworms. They're then going to hatch and migrate specifically to your intestines, but we do see they can go from intestines, bloodstream, lungs, and back to the intestines. And a heavy infection causes respiratory and intestinal distress. And guys, it actually causes a huge mass in there. You can see this huge amount of worms that would have come from a patient. These guys do have male and female. A lot of the other worms we've talked about are considered hermaphrodites. They contain both male and female parts. This particular group has male and female, and they do look different. But you have to have both present in order to lay eggs. The next one is the trichonellosis. Trichonellosis is also going to be caused by a nematode roundworm. It is going to be where you eat infected pig meat, okay, pork. If you look here in the picture, you can see that the cyst is infected or embedded into the muscle tissue, and we see it's passed to humans if we do not properly cook the pork all the way through. Internal migration then happens from your intestines. It invades nearby tissues and insists in the muscles, and specifically it likes the diaphragm and the eye muscles for some reason. We see symptoms include fever, swelling around the eyes, and gastrointestinal and respiratory pain. Strongyloides stercoralis is the next one, and again, this is part of the nematode group. It's going to be where the worms will penetrate the skin. They then migrate through the blood to your lungs and then ultimately your intestines. Heavy infestation does result in intestinal blockage like we saw before, and invasion through intestinal wall, especially in immunocompromised individuals, will occur, where we see that it'll actually rupture the intestinal wall. The next one is the Trichoris trichora. This one is the whipworm. Whipworms, when we look here, are also nematodes as well. They ingest eggs from contaminated food and water. We see that their eggs will hatch and mature in the digestive system specifically, and the adults will lay eggs that will pass out through the feces so that the cycle can start again. Now again, a heavy intestinal infestation can cause irritation of the intestine, inflammation, and it can cause a bowel obstruction as well. So these are looking at this particular chapter. We looked at the digestive diseases, but here in part 2, we focused in on viruses, we focused in on protists and worms. So if you have any questions over these, please let me know.